Good morning. Good morning. I'm just trying to make sure I've got everyone's attention. Good morning to you. We're building bridges. We're crossing borders. There are 54 countries in Africa. And if we're building bridges and we're crossing borders, we've looked at how to cross borders across all the nations in terms of security, governmental affairs, parliamentary affairs, government. Now, we're looking at how to build bridges across trade barriers. And the best way to do that is to further the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area. So we're going to go now into an AfCFTA workshop. We're looking at guiding strategic expansion, understanding and harnessing the AfCFTA for cross-border growth opportunities. And it's something that interests me as a business lawyer, as I'm sure it will many of us in here today. How do we build those bridges? How can we cross those borders? How can we make inroads into how to break down barriers so we can foster growth, trade, business, imports, exports, collaboration, and that sort of thing. And to do that, we've got a very carefully selected panel for this morning. And to lead that, we have as moderator, I'm going to introduce him now. He's a senior advocate of Nigeria. That's the equivalent of King's Counsel. He has been a former Attorney General and Honorable Commissioner for Justice of Lagos State in Nigeria. He's an author. He writes. He is a founding partner of a firm, African Law Partners, with offices across not just Nigeria and Ghana, but also making inroads into legal practice in Africa. I'd like to introduce as moderator this morning, Mr. Shasore, Senior Advocate of Nigeria.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Our session proves to be one of the most impactful that you will attend at this session. I say that with all humility. Good morning. Well, because there are actually two mini sessions in one big session. And as policymakers within the legal space, I believe that at the end of these two mini sessions, that we'll be able to be, tools to the implementation of what has become clearly one of the most profound developments in economic integration anywhere in the world in the last 10 years. You might have learn't from what I've just said that I'm a great champion of the AfCFTA. Now, I just wanted to see that before we do the sessions proper, and I yield to Gladstone to introduce the panel, just to try and give you some context of what we're talking about. And I'm going to start with a little quote from one of my heroes, who sadly passed away in 2020, Thandika Mwakandwiwere of Malawi, an economist of great repute. He said this. Now, I want to try and see if I can carry you along with this. I know it's early. There is a very deep commitment to the continent. Tell me when I get your feelings wrong. There's a very deep commitment to the continent, yes? Yes. If you walked up to most Africans and told them, this is not me, this is Thandika. If you walked up to most Africans and told them that they now, this morning, belonged to the United States of Africa, they wouldn't be upset. Yes? Silence. The United States of Africa. I don't think. He goes on, whether you like it or not, he goes on to say, because Pan-Africanism is a positive emotion, has a positive emotional resonance. Unfortunately, then he then says, there are no institutions translating that emotional commitment to the continent into regional integration. And by that, he was referring to the AfCFTA and the hope that it'll become one such institution that will achieve regional integration. Now, regional integration, as funny as it is a phrase that was first put together in Africa by the OAU. I remember the Organization of African Unity, as far back as 1963. 1963. The promise of the Charter was this ludicrous belief that Africa would one day be economically integrated. Now, if you can imagine in 1963 how ludicrous that would have sounded, because there were still countries struggling for political independence, talk less of economic independence. But it was that vision that we will one day have economic integration. Ladies and gentlemen, we are there today. And in 1963, those visionaries need a round of applause from you guys, please. Because, I mean, the Northern Hemisphere must have been laughing their heads off. But guess what happened? In 1980, some heads of state got together and decided, in what is called the Lagos Plan of Action, that they will actualize this promise of 1963. So it took Africa enough decades, a couple, to say, hang on, we've made a promise to ourselves. And then in 1991, the Abuja Treaty was made, and we then fast forward into Kigali, which I'll talk about in a minute. But economic integration. So it tells you that the AfCFTA isn't just a free trade agreement. No, it's not just a common market, as the EU was often referred to. It's a promise of economic integration. And that philosophy, as General Counsel, as Government Counsel, as private practitioners, as leaders of policy, many of you probably future ministers of trade and attorneys general, it is that philosophy that those visionaries had that underpins the entire agreement. So what you're going to hear today, you'll hear a lot of revealing things about how. I thought it was important to put a context to it. So the year is 2018, and sorry, I get animated, so I can't stay in one place. So in 2018, okay, we're in Rwanda. And it's less than 2 years since the Brexit vote happened in 2016. So Europe, that solid unity, had suddenly had a crack, a big crack, because Great Britain was a big part of the union. And nobody knew whether there was going to be a union worth talking about. That same year, 2018, across the Atlantic, Trump is in the White House, and he's isolationist. He's talking about changing the global economic order. He's not interested in NAFTA, the North American equivalent. He's not interested in trade agreements with anybody. Africa went in the opposite direction. And 44 countries decided that we were going to have the trade agreement. Now that is the context upon which you are going to listen to. The whole decision to come together and make this thing work. So 8 protocols and several annexures and documents as this high. I don't know any living human being who's read the whole agreement. Maybe Beatrice, when she comes on stage, will tell you. She's read the whole agreement. But I've read enough of it to know that it is doable. You'll hear a lot to talk about. You'll hear a lot about the obstacles, the challenges, and hopefully some solutions. But I want at the end of these sessions to think introspectively about how we can help to make this come to fruition. Lassen, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be back, don't worry. You're looking forward to that, aren't you?
Ladies and gentlemen, can you join me to give Mr. Shasore another hand of applause? Yes, that was quite some context, and it's what we want to be discussing in our next session. The session is going to be broken into two sessions, and we want to focus on the African Continental Free Trade Area. My name is Laston Gulume. I am a practice director with ALP East Africa, which is part of the integrated practice, the Africa law practice. which is part of ALP, Nigeria and Co, and in Ghana we are ALA. So when we talk of integration, when you hear Mr. Shasore, a senior counsel, very passionate about integration, that is what we are doing. But this morning, we want to kickstart our discussion with the panelists that I'm going to be inviting shortly. And this is where we are, with the context that Mr. Shasore, senior counsel, has given us, as we are looking at trade in Africa, and more so if the biggest and largest free trade area since the establishment of the World Trade Organization is under this agreement that Mr. Shasore has just talked about. Ladies and gentlemen, our first panel is going to be led by Mr. Shasore himself, who is going to moderate that panel. But let me give you a brief context of where we are so far. Yes, the agreement that we are going to be talking about this morning was opened up for signing on the 21st of March 2018 in Kigali. That is after many decades of realizing a journey that we had committed towards the African states. Thankfully, it did not take very long to come into force. On 30th May 2019, we had sufficient instruments that had been deposited for that agreement to come into force as an international agreement. As of today, as we're speaking, we have 54 countries that have signed. We have 47 of those have deposited their instruments. 7 of those that have signed have not yet deposited their ratification instruments. And we are still praying for Eritrea, which is soon to sign. And I'm sure Madam Beatrice here can authoritatively attest to that. But interestingly, one other good fact to note, that on the 7th of July 2019, the 12th Extraordinary Summit of the African Union launched the operational phase of the agreement. And 5 very key instruments were adopted, which as General Counsel, which both in the private and public sector, you want to be very much be interested in. One, the rules of origin. The rules of origin, I will not belabor to explain those, as part of the panels are going to be making some hints on when we talk of trade and movement of goods, how do some of these things affect how we can realize the African dream. The tariff concessions, definitely when it comes to trade, how much you're charging and how much you're levying affects how trade moves. The online mechanism on monitoring. I love this one because the non-tariff barriers, usually when it comes to trade integration, on the paper, you can have that we have waived so much or we have conceded on so much, and yet in terms of the regulatory requirements, there are many barriers that are not tariff in nature, and how do you report and how do you monitor the elimination of those? And fourthly, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. One of the panelists you're going to hear this morning is very passionate about how you liberalize issues of financial services and how funds and finances move across the African states. And lastly, the African Trade Observatory. Friends, we are making great strides when it comes to realizing the African dream when it comes to free trade. But at the center of implementing locally and domestically are people such as your General Counsel. You are advising government, you are advising big corporate multinational corporations, which, if they were behind pushing for the agenda of realizing the African free trade area, then we'll see a market that has over 1.2 billion people, which according to the expectations of the growth of that population will be in about 2.5 billion. Now that's a big market. That's a very big market, and we can all, if we are very intentional about this, if we're only half as passionate as Mr. Shasore is, then definitely we'll be very fast. So without any further ado, I want to invite the Executive General Counsel of the Sub-Saharan Africa, GE Vernova, Ms. Ozim. Ifeoma, who is one of our panelists, could you join me to welcome her with a hand of applause? I learned, yeah, you can see it. I just learned that this is a true Pan-African who has not been just in one state. She was in Kenya. She's doing a round of giving her services across different African states, and definitely her value to the panel is going to be very, very valuable. Our next panelist will have Miss Mansa Williams, who is a senior associate with ALA Ghana. Mansa is a very passionate legal practitioner. She is not only passionate about advancing the African trade and the African integration, but even her practice. Thank you for giving her that kind of applause. So we believe that her being on the panel and the passionate discussions, I will quote, Mr. Shasore, are going to be very disruptive, so you can expect that. Ladies and gentlemen, we expect Mr. Adetola to join us online. In case he joins us, Adetola Onayemi is the CEO and he's online. Thankfully, he's the CEO of Norebase, and he is going to be adding another very interesting voice from the trade perspective and the IT perspective on the discussion this morning. And our esteemed panelist, who needs no further introduction, Mr. Shasore, you are most welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our panel. And after the panel, we are going to have a Q&A. So if you have those questions and answers, part of my role this morning is to work with the IT team and the media team. We'll have microphones move around so that you can put those questions to the panel. Mr. Shasore, you're welcome to take it from there.
Thank you very much, Laston. A round of applause for Laston, please. I'm really honored to have both of you, even though, okay, Tola has made it, we're gender balanced. I was just going to say, even though I'm outnumbered, but yes, we're just about there. Tola, where are you exactly? What country are you in?
In Kigali. I'm at the AfCFTA Biashara event.
Where, in Kigali?
Yes, Kigali.
Okay. All right, say hi to them there. Let's start with, why don't we start with you, Ifeoma? The biggest challenge in free trade agreements anywhere in the world, and the Europeans will tell you that, is the kind of barriers that exist between the free movement of people, services, and goods. And I know for sure that when the Africans clearly made the intention to enter the agreement known to the world, they must have been laughing that 55 Africans are going to agree. 55 Africans on a bus couldn't agree on the color of a shirt, they probably said. But we've defeated all those naysayers, haven't we? Now, cross-border expansion of the intra-Africa trade market, if you like. What kind of initiatives do you think would be good what are the barriers that exist, and how would you go about expanding the intra-Africa trade?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Before I continue or answer the question, or attempt to answer the question, I want us to throw our mind back to what Mr. Shasore said in his beginning speech, which is the purpose of the Africa-Continental Free Trade Zone Agreement. Now, if we remember the objective, then we can, when we're discussing the barriers and what we can do, we don't just get emotional about it. We actually challenge ourselves to leave this room and think of what we can do to remove those barriers. So if the main objective of the treaty is to boost trade within Africa, to make it easier to move goods and persons from point A to point B, to make it easier for the woman selling in the market to be able to fend for her family, move her goods across borders, receive goods to trade with, galvanize the small and medium-scale industry, and harness this informal trade group that are usually unaccounted for, and leads to economic emancipation and poverty eradication, then it will be easier for us to connect the dots. And when we see the customs, human barrier at our borders, challenging or negating the ideals of this treaty, then maybe something in us would rise to speak up and defeat those barriers, because these barriers are in form of tax, non-tariff and tariff barriers. They're in form of human barriers, physical barriers to movement of goods and services, and even policies created by people like you and I in rooms, and also not being invited to those forums where these policy discussions are taken, and missing out voice of reason in some instances. So these are the sort of barriers we see. But the question, or what we would attempt to address, is why do we still have these barriers, and what are we going to do about it? Because the treaty is clear with what it aims to achieve. Then we have a barrier challenging the treaty that 54 African countries on a normal day have come together to agree. I mean, I'm sure for those people of faith, you've heard the saying, can two work together except they agree? Now, 54 people have agreed to work together, have agreed, then self-imposed, because I see those barriers are self-imposed, whether it's our customs officers at the borders, or the laws we make ourselves, these exist. But we need to give voice or validity to these treaties, and also bringing it back to our countries, create the enabling environment, and not just, because one thing is to have the treaty, then we are back home thinking nationalistic. It's a conflict. Because nationalistic thinking wouldn't help a continental treaty. So we have to determine what do we really want. And if we are pro-nationalist, then perhaps we birthed the treaty too early. I'll stop there.
Okay, very interesting. But let's shrink it down now and come to my company, my organization. So I'm general counsel of a medium-sized multinational. We're already in more than one country, some in Africa, some outside. What do the people across the corridor, the business side of the business, how do they view competition? Because if, as a company, we ourselves are afraid of competition and we set up our own internal business decision making, afraid of the next person in the business, that will permeate up into the policymakers and it will go up into the heads of government. So I think, do you see, being the general counsel of a very large corporate that you are, do you see, what are the things that you see positive about the business side of your business towards competition that can help to break down these barriers as a company and therefore as a player in the African market?
Thank you very much for that. If you don't have competition, then you're probably not doing anything worth the while. So be grateful for competition, because they keep you on your toes and they keep you thinking of how to improve yourself. And ultimately, the people or the companies you see as your competition are not as big as your own personal competition to yourself, because your drive should be the better version of yourself, whether individually or as a corporate organization. And I see competition as healthy. Unfortunately, the average human being does not like competition. And, okay, I love Africa. I mean, Africa is in my blood, and I'm a proud Nigerian. However, having had the privilege in the course of work of traveling within Africa and working in different jurisdictions, I see that the default position that we have is to be antagonistic against the next person, right? And see people as competition to be taken out. Competition is there to make you better.
So that's one of those physical barriers you were speaking of.
Yes.
The approach, the natural instinct towards
the next person in the same line of business.
Absolutely. However, flipping it, just take legal services. A majority of us here are lawyers. If you're a lawyer in Uganda, your competition is not the lawyer in South Africa. Your competition is yourself, because if you don't give good legal services, the people you are with in Uganda would seek that lawyer in South Africa if they can solve their problem. So at the end of the day, we are better to get, so it behoves on us to find out, okay, what are they doing next door that I can learn from? And what am I not doing as well as the other? And if you're, just take yourself back to your high school days. The very smart ones, going to them to teach you is not a sign of weakness. It is to learn. But then if you pretend to know it all, me, myself, and I, it will show up in the results. So the way I wish we would look at this treaty, African treaty, is what are we, who does it better, and how can we collaborate? Because there's strength in unity. And if we don't see it that way, there's something I like to say, you don't negotiate with buildings, you negotiate with individuals. So even if company A, company B are negotiating an agreement, it's not the building negotiating, it's you and I. If I don't like the color of your tie,
Yeah.
I'll bring it into the agreement as if it has anything to do with the agreement. You know, but we need to get beyond those biases of seeing the next person as a competition, and when if we don't, then regardless of how laudable the African treaty is, when it comes to implementation, the humans that are expected to implement these ideals will not get rid of their biases and will look for nationalistic tendencies to disrupt the ideals of the treaty.
So the non-tariff barriers are the big problem with the human beings.
Absolutely.
So more AfCFTA training for the government sector.
More
AfCFTA training.
for both government and private, because
So,
we're all users, but I think we need to change
so we need
our
to
mindset.
skill up. We need to skill up.
Scale it up.
Okay. Mansa, you know, I'm a big, I belong to the school of thought that when people give statistics and say that intra-Africa trade is so percentage less than, and it is true, it is, intra-Africa trade is abysmally low compared to what it could be. But I also believe that the intra-Africa trade figures are grossly underreported. They're underreported because of the very nature of informal business. They generally tend not to engage the formal sector where data capture is known to happen. And so there's probably a lot more intra-Africa trade than people say there is. And so the feel-good factor that comes with that is lost when you report on Africa. But the main people who do intra-Africa trade in that area are the informal sector, the SMEs and what. What would you say about, what would you think about, how can we drive this expansion in that sector, in the informal sector? How would you, unless of course you don't agree that there is a lot to do with the protocol on trading goods and the informal sector?
Thank you for your question and good morning to everyone. The informal sector forms a huge part of trade when we are talking about Africa trade. I believe the informal sector will account in some regions 60% of trade will fall under the informal sector. I believe even in West Africa, and therefore the informal sector, the SMEs, are a key stakeholder, and they cannot be overlooked because they are driving trade in a lot of regions. So it's about how do we position them to benefit from the agreements. So, and thank you very much, interesting take. I believe that in as much as decisions are being made at the top, we need to find a way to carry people along, especially the people in the informal sector. And it looks like decisions are being made and it's remote to the normal person on the ground. And for the informal sector, the informal traders, we need to find a way of letting information trickle down, dissemination of information. They need to know what AfCFTA is all about. They need to know, how do I benefit from the reduction in tariffs? What role do I play? How can I be a beneficiary? And thankfully, this is being done. If you look in July 2022, at the Busia border, there was training held on tariff reduction for informal traders, so that they can position themselves to benefit, so that they know that there is something happening that I can be a beneficiary of. So information, education, I believe, is very important, just as you said, and this is ongoing and it needs to intensify. You see it a lot in East Africa. So the East Africa community, they do a lot of training for member countries and for the people in the informal sector. Also, I believe that making the formal markets accessible to informal traders and SMEs. So if you look at the ECOWAS liberalization trade scheme, efforts to remove the bureaucracy so that do you want to say something?
No, you reminded me of something. Let me finish.
So informal traders can formalize their operation so that they can trade with and they can access certain markets.
So you believe that the more contact that they have with the formal sector,
yes,
it will deepen that market and make them perform better?
Yes.
That's interesting. And it's going to make me segue into something that is probably not on our plate for today, but I think it's interesting because as General Counsel, we are very much engaged with the informal sector because the potentiality of our market and the contact with our market comes from this sector. So even though many of us might not be representing SMEs or things in the informal sector, it's an area that we all have to pay attention to, even in our big corporate offices. But what made me laugh is we're sitting in Ghana, and I was at a conference where we were talking about dispute resolution under the AfCFTA and what it would look like. And I was asked to give some anecdotal examples. And the African investment market and African investment dispute market is very thin on formal decisions from either BIT tribunals. We certainly don't have any structured equivalent of an investment tribunal for Africa. We're hoping that will emerge. I'm looking at Beatrice. We're hoping that will emerge when the negotiations on the dispute resolution protocol ends, and which should be of interest to all of us. But why I laughed when Mansa was talking is because I was sitting in Ghana, and one of the few reported disputes under the ECOWAS liberalization regime, which is a mini forebear of what you will see in AfCFTA when it is in full bloom. So it's something that you should pay attention to. There was a dispute between Ghana and Nigeria in 2020. I think it was, yes, 2020. The Ghanaian Trade Promotion Commission, I forget their name, had decided that several Nigerian traders had not complied with a particular rule about investment into the country. And that rule required them to have something like a $10,000 deposit. It was a scary amount for traders. And it was true, they had not complied. And
over 5,000, I think almost 10,000 traders were in jeopardy of being pushed out of the country for non-compliance with this rule. And the Nigerian trade minister's response was, well, that rule, if you set it against the ECOWAS liberalization protocol, that internal law is inconsistent with the treaty, and you should always favor the treaty in accordance with ECOWAS. So there was a nice little dispute boiling. Now, if that was Europe, that would have ended up in a tribunal and would have had 5 years of litigation. People like me would have become very rich from fees. So, I mean, I'm not really in favor of what happened in the end. But guess what happened? It's within that year, the Ghanaian Trade Ministry, for some reason, was in Abuja. And tempers had gone very high, and tit for tat was about to happen. If you do that to our traders, we will do X to your traders. And within 2 days of a visit to Abuja, the dispute was resolved, and some sort of new regime and rules were made under the existing Ghana. But the point I'm making here is that that is kudos for African methods of trade dispute resolution, and it is a glimmer into what will happen, hopefully continent-wide, when the AfCFTA is in full bloom. And, you know, I don't know, can I get a round of applause for that?
You guys are mindset, and you're mindset with your cracks. So that leads me very neatly into Tola, who's enjoying in Kigali and making money while we're at the trade. So
Tola's his background is IT, and you know, if we're to do any trade of services or anything across Africa, we need something that allows money to interoperate across the country, across the continent. What would you say about the state? What's the state of play with cross-border money and how it sits in the IT framework across the continent? What do you have to say about it, Tola?
Thank you very much, and I'm excited to be here and to have these set of conversations. But more particularly on the issue of cross-border payment and money movement within the continent, right? I think that it's important to put a lot of context, right? And probably like 3-4 contexts is important to set, right? So the first context to put in place is that we don't today have a Pan-African economic policy of sorts, right? We don't have a Pan-African central bank of sorts, right, either. And we're beginning to have convening mechanisms for our central banks and to start to have conversations about what policy might look like, but we don't have that today. The implication of that is that fundamentally, payment is incredibly fragmented today across the continent. But I think before I give that, let me give a bit of context and I help. So today, when you think of global payments, right, global payments work on 3 basic logic. The first is this concept of identity, meaning I can identify the person. The second is this concept of creditworthiness. I know your creditworthiness. And third is this concept of penalty. The idea is that today, when you try to swipe your card in London or swipe your card in the US, what happens is that someone identifies and says, this person is Tola, right? He has creditworthiness to this amount. And the reason is because today, when you do transactions, money doesn't move instantly. There's the whole T+3 where money moves 3 days after or the rest, right? And so what happens is that we have a card scheme method, right? Which is like the popular card scheme method, right? Whether it's Visa, MasterCard, RuPay, and you know, all the many ones that exist, right? And the card schemes allow us to create some kind of interoperability between our different card systems or payment systems that exist. Now, but when you think of it, the West, which kind of pioneered most of how we think of payment globally today, have those things going. They have an identity system, they have a clear creditworthiness system, but finally they have a penalty system in the sense that if you're not creditworthy, I can penalize you, right, for being a bad actor. The thing is that when we started building payment systems in most of Africa and most emerging markets, we didn't have the same thing. We didn't have a strong identity system. And so what happens is that we built domestic payment system that worked for us in our own specific local context. So I'll give you an example, right? Today, when you think of payments in Nigeria, we do instant payment, right? Whether it's pay with bank transfers, whether it's USSDs, right? Which is probably what today is the most ways people do payments in Nigeria. Card penetration is about just 3% in Nigeria, right? When you go to a place like Kenya, you see M-Pesa and what it's done. When you go to a place like Ghana, you see Momo and mobile money, right? But these are fragmented, different structures that have existed in the different markets and that have been built to attend to the local situations that exist. The problem is that when you start trying to create a real Pan-African wide, or even with the entire world on this basis, there's no mechanism for interoperability between a NIBS pay bank transfer in Nigeria and a mobile payment system, a mobile payment system in Ghana, or an M-Pesa in Kenya, right? And so today, those systems are incredibly fragmented. So that's the experience you have when someone wants to make payments for a basic transaction in any African country. It even gets worse when you go to places like Francophone Africa, where a lot of the system is built around the CFA, centrally controlled from France, and all that kind of mechanism more generally. But what we're beginning to see is that there is emerging very quickly a place for fintechs, right, across the continent to play that role of saying, yes, the central banks haven't done the work today, right? But what we can start to do is we can try to build rails of saying, I will do the escrowing between you wants to do a transaction from South Africa to Nigeria, or you want to do a transaction between Nigeria and Ghana, and I'll do the escrowing. I'll take the hand-holding work of moving money from one place to another to make it work. But I think three things that are important to also know: that in recent times there's a conversation about PAPS, right? PAPS is this regime being floated by AfCFTA. It's supposed to ensure that we can do transfers within the continent without having to touch base with the USD. So you can do local to local transfers within the continent without having to think too much about all that. But beyond that also, there's also conversations that are happening, right, within the digital trade protocol, right? So for context, over the last 18 months, I've been supporting the negotiations at the AfCFTA level of the digital trade protocol, which was adopted in February by the heads of state. And there are two annexes focused particularly on payments. One of them is an annex on cross-border on payments particularly, and the other is an annex on fintechs. Now, but more specifically, when you think of it, right, what it's trying to do fundamentally is create a way for interoperability. So to say, what are the minimum standards that we all can start to attain? And why does that matter? So when you start to think of interoperability and integration, you have to take one of two pathways. You either take a pathway towards standardization or a pathway towards harmonization. Standardization means you're saying, you know what, everybody agree to the same rules, we're going to do the exact same thing. Or you go the harmonization route where you're saying, you know what, I agree that our standards might be different, but how do we make it work together? But why this matters is simple. One of the things you want to do from a payment integration is license passporting. You want to be that if I can comply with the standards in Nigeria, that is enough for me to carry that license requirement into any other market that I want to do business. So if I say I am qualified and I'm licensed by the Nigerian Central Bank, I should be able to carry that level of license regulatory that I've met into Ghana. But you can't do that if the standards that each government expects is very different. As one of the first steps that the digital trade protocol is trying to move to is to say, can we agree on all the minimum standards that every country would agree to, so that then it becomes easier to say, okay, we all will meet this. And of course, as the protocol is doing, we expect it to be done this month, next month, right? Which is one of the reasons I'm here in Kigali. But what happens next is that member states now have to then start to set up their laws to meet the standards that we all agree to within the protocol. And then the next thing then becomes, how do we do passports?
Okay, Tola, stop.
Or how do we do? Yeah.
Okay, Tola, stop. So we're about to get a scoop here. You heard it first here. Are we likely in the protocol that you're working with AfCFTA? And if you can't speak, you say you can't speak. Don't worry, we'll just hate you for it. But are we likely to get that as a feature of the protocol? And I'll tell the audience the importance of this question is. He started with a very gloomy picture, and Tola always does that. The countries are different. The countries are different. But the hope and the light in the tunnel is this protocol that I hope will be choosing the standardization and not the harmonization, because I think that's the short way home. Are we likely to get that feature in this your round, or is it still far away in the horizon?
So that's a very interesting question. I'd answer it this way. What's happening is we've set out the standards, right? We've put out the drafts of what we think, and member states have engaged with it. One of the things that member states have come back to is to say, all those requirements you are setting out, there's a gap between where we are today and what we need to meet, right? For the protocol. And it's not just in payments, it's in all the other parts of the protocol. So for instance, one of the parts of the protocol is something that says that member states cannot compel you to do things in a fiscal form that can be done electronically. There's language like that in the protocol, right? There's language about data transfer. There's language about saying you cannot impose customs duties, right? So there's a lot of those language. Where we are is where member states are saying, okay, we see the ideal, but there's a gap between where we are today and that. What kind of capacity building or what kind of skill set development do we need to be able to catch? Because what happens is, if I commit as a member state today to this and I sign an agreement, what happens is that now I'm committed to, within the transitional period, which is going to be 3 to 4 years, to meet that rule. And so they're all saying, are we at that place? Do we have those? And so that's the negotiations that's happening, right? So I would want us to have that, but of course the tinkering in the end, and we have to, and Beatrice will say this more than I will, in the end, member states are the ones negotiating, right? And member states will decide what they want. But they aim to get to that level of ambition because that's what we think needs to happen on the continent. But the fact is that we then also have to do the whole conversion of saying, what's the gap between where we are today and what, for instance, there are small states, I wouldn't mention anything, but there are small states that will say things like, yeah, Nigeria may be there, South Africa may be there, but we are so far away from where you want us to be, and who's going to help us get that? And it then means one of the things we're going to have to do as next year is also build out support programs for those kind of states. And one of the things we're even thinking about is things like almost like a carrot mechanism to say, as we design this mechanism up, if you do subscribe as quickly as possible, we'll support you with the whole process of being able to catch it up with that, whether it's supporting with drafting your laws, whether it's supporting you with being able to comply with specific things. But that's kind of how the conversations are going today. The hope is that we get it. That's the ambition, but we'll see how it plays out.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a great development. In a nutshell, trading goods is the key component. Some people will disagree with me. It is the key component in AfCFTA. And if you can get the trading goods to achieve the workability of trading goods, payment, integrated payment across the borders is very important. So even though Tola is being diplomatic, he's saying that there is wording now that the member states, you heard it here first at the ACGC, that there's wording now that hopefully member states will be able to agree to, that we will have something in the direction of standardization. There are already payment systems in domestic countries that travel across borders. Don't get me wrong, and that's part of what Tola said at the beginning. So M-Pesa and many of these things, Verve, they travel across borders, but it isn't on the level that we require in order to be able to make the kind of payment system that Europe has. And we're not far away. PAPPS, perhaps, is not directly an AfCFTA instrument, but it is probably one of the widest, earliest developments that we have. And we need 17 PAPs, as a matter of fact. It's not just one. I'm always very, very insistent on that. It's not just them. We should encourage other people to, and the AfCFTA and AfrExim should encourage other people to get involved. The more, the merrier. But the standards are important. Thank you very much for that. Interoperability was a phrase you used very often. And, you know, my room is full of highly intellectual, well-read and educated people who know everything about AfCFTA. But imagine, I don't. Can you tell me what interoperability exactly is?
Oh, definitely. Interoperability basically means building systems in a way that they work seamlessly with each other and are compatible with each other.
So when you say interoperability, you're talking about the interoperability of the payment systems across borders?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, basically. Because the thing is, systems have been built, right? You don't want to, and I'm a lawyer, right? Like everyone else in the room, right?
Yeah,
but like,
I wouldn't, nobody would believe you.
Right? But fundamentally, what you don't want is, and lawyers would say this more than, when you build out an entire system, nobody wants to usurp and turn over the system in a way that works. Imagine going to tell the central bank today to stop using NIBs. It just doesn't work. So what you want to do from an interoperability point of view is to say, how do we get NIBs to work with M-Pesa, to work with Momo, right, in a way that is seamless. And when you think of the card schemes, it's not new. When you think of the card schemes today, Visa and MasterCard, that's fundamentally what Visa and MasterCard does, right? It says that, oh, you can have your different cards, whether it's American Express or your Maestro, you can use all your cards, but I'm going to create an underlying card scheme that ensures that those things can interoperate between each other in a very seamless manner.
So interoperability and this payment and this digital protocol, Is this the death of the dollar? Is this the beginning of the? Is this the wake keep for the dollar?
I don't. So I think that the dollar would always have its place in the global economy.
Oh,
right? The US is 25% of global GDP. It's just what it is. But I think that what would happen is that within Africa,
it's the hospitalization of the dollar. How about that?
I think it's about Africa. I think that
He's
the
a
play
diplomat.
for
He
us
doesn't
is
even
to
want to
ensure.
admit that.
So, I think the important thing is to ensure that within Africa, we can start to move it because there's an high cost to relying on the dollar for inter-exchange. So I'll give an example. Today in our business, we operate in 58 markets, right? We help do expansions around the world and operate in 58 countries, right? Fundamentally, what our business does is help you set up in any market in Africa, help you stay compliant in any country in Africa, right? And what happens fundamentally is that you have the situation where when you want to make payments, you need to have the money convert to USD and then back to local currency. So you're having like a double exchange. And there's a loss of money there. So there's value to being able to do a direct exchange from one to another. But I think one other thing I wanted to call out, and it's not even directly about payments, is that I think that fundamentally what would make the AfCFTA work is processes that are cross-border. And I'll give an example of one I think is brilliant that I think we should be pushing for. The question I ask a lot is, and it directly affects me, why do I need to register a company in every African country? Why am I not allowed to register a company in one country where I have an African company directory and I'm able to just have every government recognize me based on the fact that I'm registered in one country?
Yeah.
And it's similar to the issue of passporting, right? Why do I have to go get licenses in every country? And I think that that's kind of where we need to be pushing the conversations towards to say, you know what, why do I have to comply every time with every country? You are governments, right? And there's this whole big question of one government. Your government, why can't governments speak to themselves and I as private sector just show up and have those kind of countries? And that's kind of things we're pushing forward at Norebase, at my company.
Yeah. So standardizations. I think I just have enough time in this round for one more question for my panelists. So, Ifeoma, Ozim, you work for a big corporate, GE, all right? I've exposed you, GE. In your, and I'm sure there'll be acquisitions that you do or you come across, and I'm sure there'll be many more that you would do. What's the kind of, what are the concerns within, because the AfCFTA is going to bring about mergers and acquisitions as people begin to trade across borders, as businesses begin to have new jurisdictions, new boundaries that they go to. What do you think it would be your most, what factor would concern you most as General Counsel that you'd like to see some of the policymakers take on board when it comes to mergers and acquisitions and the myriad of regulations you have to walk through? Is that yeah?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Tola, for also giving us insight into what you're doing and other interdependencies that
and the scoop.
Yes. So bringing back the AfCFTA to mergers and acquisitions and also what companies can do within the jurisdiction. I want to pick from what Tola just mentioned with the Momo, M-Pesa, the NIPS. Now, what I like to always ask in every transaction is, what are we trying to solve here? And when you ask that question also, and to the point that Tola made about having to register in every country, why? And the question is, why do I need to? If you understand the why, then we can walk backwards with the solution. Now, when you talk about the mergers and acquisitions, of course, that also brings some cross-boundary issues. How do they do, what are the regulations I have to comply with in country A and country B? What are the standards? Of course, if you can't harmonize them, can we agree to a minimum standard of operation? And that really would help. And if the negotiators of the AfCFTA and the attendant mini agreements within it can always have that at the back of their mind, because if you know what it is you're trying to solve and what is important to a regulator, it may just be the licensing fee or the registration incorporation fees in one country that is giving us all this belly ache. So how about, okay, how much is your incorporation fee? 100 cedis. If we pay you 100 cedis and maintain the root original entity or local incorporation, will that solve the problem? You'll find that in terms of even when it comes to mergers and acquisition, you may have to worry with things, okay, the personnel across border, the legal entities in multiple jurisdictions where I need to collapse or I need to re-register in the new entity. Is that necessary? And without saying much, of course, let's just take a typical M&A transaction. You've merged with the company A and X have merged in different jurisdictions. So first of all, you check, okay, where do I as company A operate presently? 5 countries. Company B, where are they presently? 10 countries. So you have to deal with 15 jurisdictions within Africa. And you're dealing with 15 jurisdictions across different issues, labor and employment, tax, name it. Now, of course, the lawyers will go home happy, the tax consultants will go home happy. However, will this, and everything, I want us to be adding up everything. So these fees we are paying consultants to help us figure out how to bring everybody together. Imagine if we had a seamless operation within the country. Oh, he's frowning because we're trying to save some costs here. But I mean, we have to say it as it is, because it's not just having a treaty or regulations that will favor a group of consultants to the detriment of the rest of the region. There will still be opportunity to make money as consultants. Yeah. However, the bigger focus should be, how do we galvanize business within Africa so that even if we are looking to expansion, mergers and acquisitions, companies don't shy away from mergers and acquisitions because of the rules, because of the regulations, because of the taxes, because of the complexities and the uncertainties. Yesterday we were at the compliance section, and one question that came up was the uncertainty of our regulation. So you're dealing with the nationalistic laws that are not clear. Then you're also dealing with an African treaty that have not been given effect by the nationalistic laws. So let's make things simpler. And that will also galvanize trade and help us solve the unemployment and the poverty issue that is the bane in Africa.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. A lot to unpack. But Mansa, just to feed off that, I mean, you heard Tola, and you've looked at the informal market. Do you find, from an experiential point of view, and from also maybe an objective, optimal point of view, do you find that this informal market, the SMEs, do you find them embracing national, non-physical transfer card transactions within their borders and able to do so across borders, at least to neighboring countries? Has that been your experience?
I haven't had much experience, but I believe this is the case, and I believe that they are taking advantage of the platforms that are available. He spoke about M-Pesa in East Africa, which I believe. And
Momo,
Momo in Ghana, Momo which the informal sector relies on. Yes, and it's a big advantage for the informal sector, especially when it comes to access to finance and credit, because of the availability of microloans and facilities that can help them expand.
Does it eliminate foreign exchanging? Are they able to do that as well?
Well, it does eliminate, because you're trading in your local currency, so there's no need for the dollar.
So it's fair to say that this card payment system and the hope that we will be able to get some sort of standard payment across Africa will actually unleash the informal market.
It's critical.
It's absolutely critical. So Tola, you got your work cut out for you. When are we getting the protocol? You need to work harder. You need to work harder. You don't even look stressed.
The protocol has been adopted in February. The annexes is what's been negotiated now. There are 8 of them.
Yeah.
The aim is to get them done before the end of the year so that member states can go into ratifications and then go into trying to catch up with and just for context also, right? It's not just payments that states. There's the one about emerging and advanced technology, which is one of the annexes. There's the issue around data transfer, which by the way is probably even just as important because fundamentally to do digital trading, we need to move data from one place to another. There's the one around custom duty. One of the agreement that the member states agreed was that custom duty would not be imposed fundamentally on digital goods, which is a big development because it means that no one is going to impose custom duty. There's one on source codes that says that I will not require you to unveil your source codes if you are trying to get access to my market. But I think just piggybacking on some of the things that were said already, particularly around regulatory work, and I think that there is a very big space for us beginning to build the right tools that help expansion happen around the continent, right? One of the reasons why we went to start the company in Norebase was fundamentally to ensure that people could access markets in the continent easier, navigate licenses easier. One of the things we rolled out, I think, some 2 months ago is something called a compliance compass. It fundamentally means that you can actually just go to one website, put your name of your company, and get all the compliance and regulation that applies to you in every African market free of charge, right? And so it's things like that, right? Beginning to build tools like that to ensure that it's easier for people to actually just think. Because the reason is that half of the time there's a big concern for people.
Who's doing that?
Yes. So
who's doing that?
My company Norebase does that already. I think
you pay for the advertising after. You pay for that. You get the invoice.
It's
free. No. You're getting an invoice that you plugged it already.
It's free service. And the reason why that matters is that a number of times expansion and even daring to do business in a number of markets is an issue of fear. People are uncertain. People are scared. They don't know what the rules are in those markets. And they don't just venture because of that. Yeah. But sometimes it's not as hard as you think, right? Yeah. It's not as difficult as you think, and it's actually even easier to navigate, right? So it's things like that that becomes incredibly important for businesses.
Wouldn't that be wonderful, audience, to go to a window and at least have plug in what you want and at least have an overview of all the compliance requirement you need across Africa and what you need to do to take your business to the next. That would be wonderful. When would that project be concluded?
Is gone live. I'll put the link in the chat and anyone can go there right away, actually.
You're putting it in the chat on your chat here?
Yeah, I just put it under
okay, so
chat.
Hopefully the organizers will make sure that it gets, I'm getting a thumbs up, that everybody gets a look at it to experience that. See the value you're getting at the ACGC. We don't want to trespass on trading services is what they're coming to talk about. So they're going to drive us off this stage. But we will be back. We will be back. All right? Thank you very much.
Just before we have you move off this stage, we still need you here just a little because there are some questions that have been brewing. And yes, and the communication I wanted to make is kindly just write down those questions. We're having another panel that is going to take us through a very short discussion. I don't know if we'll have Adetola then. But
Adetola should wait. It is punishment for being in Kigali. Should wait.
Also, I have a colleague in the crowd. Onawe is my colleague, and she's actually in the room.
Onawe?
But I'll be...
Oh, perfect.
Okay, we've seen her.
But I'll also stay, but Onawe.
Yes, so my request to the audience is you'll just write down those questions. We have our next panel so that we can have a comprehensive, longer question and answer session. Ladies and gentlemen, could you give it up a hand of applause for our panelists? Yes, that was quite a very interesting discussion. It leads us to our next discussion where we are going to be hearing from, among others, someone from the Secretariat. Adetola asked an interesting question. Should I be registering my company in every partner state, in every state that I'm going to be doing business in? And that takes us a little bit deeper into what the protocols are. How do I consume services? How do I supply services? Movement of goods and the barriers to the movement of goods. I will not take any further much of our time. I'll directly introduce our next panel. This panel is going to be moderated by a friend, a brother of mine, Solagbade, who is a partner at Africa Law Practice LP Nigeria and Co. Can we give him a hand of applause? Our next panelist, a very interesting and well-enriched, informed panelist. I'll invite Ms. Beatrice Chaytor. I hope I pronounced that well. She's the head of division at the Trading Services at the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. Yes, Beatrice, we're excited to have you. And many questions are actually coming to you. Many questions. Last but not least, we have Mr. Tekyo Seram, who is the in-house counsel for Africa Intercon Security Systems. Tekyo, you are most welcome. This being a smaller panel is going to take the next 30 minutes to discuss the areas that we have set up for discussion. Kindly have those questions written down. We are going to be working with the IT and media team. They'll have a microphone just come right to you when we go into the general question and answer. We'll have all our panelists back up, and like Mr. Shasore borrowed Schwarzenegger's phrase, he will be back.
Thank you, Laston. And he's correct. If you have any questions, direct them to Beatrice because she's got inside information. And it was literally a year ago that Beatrice and I had a fireside chat about the AfCFTA, and we were lauding it at that point. And since then, there's been a lot of detractors, and don't get me wrong, there are a lot of detractors, and I'm sure some are in this room, but we'll try and convince you to be proponents of the AfCFTA once we're done. Beatrice, so we want to focus on trade and services. If we look at the 5 priority sectors, tourism, transportation, telecoms, business services, and financial services, because of the audience and because most people are general counsel and lawyers, we want to focus on business and professional services. What role do general counsel and lawyers have in the realization and actualization of the AfCFTA? And I'm thinking about things of this nature, policy advocacy, regulatory framework, drafting. Everyone in this room has a massive role to play in the AfCFTA. You might not know it now, but Beatrice will give you some information about how you can play a part in realizing this dream of Africa.
Thank you very much, Shola, and it's my pleasure to be here. I actually believe that I'm among family because I was with you in Kigali last year. Made so many friends that I'm still in touch with, so it's my pleasure to welcome you to Accra, the home of the AfCFTA Secretariat, and to say I really want to encourage you to think of the AfCFTA as your home, because I think lawyers are really at the heart of the AfCFTA. When I think of how we started negotiating this agreement, from the very beginning, lawyers were involved. This is a treaty. It's a legal instrument. So everything from negotiation right up until implementation, you are at the heart of it. You play a role. Now, right now, we have, under the Protocol on Trade and Services, 22 schedules of specific commitments. Just to remind you, under the protocol, there are 2 ways that we have the liberalization taking place for the opening of markets effectively. We have the schedules of specific commitments, which actually put the meat on the bones of the skeleton of the protocol. That tells you where the depth and the scope of opening, market opening, and then when you get into the market, the operational conditions for doing your business, what those conditions are. Then you have the regulatory frameworks that basically say exactly what our colleague Tola was saying, moving from country to country, territory to territory. What regulations are you facing? Now, are those similar or are they so different that they add burden to your business in terms of operational costs, in terms of time used to kind of get licensing, compliance costs, etc. So that's what we're working on at the moment. So we've got the 22 schedules, which tell you, and then right now we're working on regulatory frameworks for financial services and communication services. Now, Tola was talking about he was talking about the digital protocol. Now, that digital protocol, we think, is actually a support protocol to the two operative protocols, the protocol on trade in goods and the protocol on trade in services. Because if you don't have open markets in communication services, you're not going to get the benefits of the digital trade protocol. You must open markets for telecoms, for all the other attendant communications subsectors. You want to do e-commerce, you must open courier services. You want to do, use drone technology, you must open some ways, even in terms of payments, fintech. You must have both issues to do with financial services, and you must have communication services. So lawyers really are, I believe, essential. Whether you're a government lawyer, you're a general counsel in the corporate world, I believe that this AfCFTA is for you. The other thing to remember is that the justice system, the legal system, is really essential for doing business. That helps to instill trust amongst the business community. When you have a good justice system, you have good access to justice, you have transparent administrative practices, you have rules and procedures that tell you how you can enter a market, what the conditions are, and the rules and practices. Just even how you organize, just even have it going every conference, ACGC, going from country to country and doing your conference. I'm sure that you have run into just general rules in the different places where you've held your conferences. So even little things like that can remind you of just how important your business services are as lawyers and as, I would say, enablers for the general business environment. So I would leave that there and just say, I believe that lawyers are actually the core of the AfCFTA, and I really would encourage you to play your role in the different ways that you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Beatrice. Underneath all that, Beatrice made a pledge. Essentially, we're going to put a communique or a position paper together based on what we've just discussed, and she's going to get it to the top management at the Secretariat. There you go. So Godwin, another thing in the Trade and Services Protocol is the 4 modes of supply of services across Africa. Consumption abroad, cross-border supply, commercial presence, and there's one more, I'm not quite sure what it is. Oh yes, free movement of natural persons. So you have a very funny anecdote as to how you got here yesterday or the day before yesterday. Free movement of persons is going to be pivotal. It's going to be very pivotal in the AfCFTA. So that story, please humor our audience.
Okay, so thanks, Solagbade. So I do have a story to share about how I got in here. I'm from Togo, so I'm just from the neighborhood, but I struggled before getting into Accra. At first, I wanted to take my own car and just drive so that I can be, like in Kigali, Dapo and Adetola designated driver. Over there, a cousin was kind enough to let me use his car. So when I decided to take my car, someone told me that I needed some additional paperwork. I needed an international driver license, an international registration card before getting a free pass. So I didn't want to put my head into that. So finally, I decided to rent a car. I'm talking about what happened just 2 days ago. I rented the car, but at the borders of Aflao, it turns out his international registration card has expired. All the other paperwork was okay, just that one. He explained the situation that he's just going to drop me off and come back. So the police officer let us go. we're on a free roll. No police officer across the road, so I just so happy about it. People that know the distance between Lome and Accra, it's 3 to 4 hours by car. It's really not far. So I left Lome at 10 a.m. When we arrive at Dabala Customs, another control over there, where is the free pass? Where's the international registration card and so on? So I tried to explain the situation to them. They wouldn't understand. So they say, you have to go back to the AfCFTA borders, sort out the situation, the issue with the paperwork before coming back. I told them that I couldn't. So I had to call for another car. I've waited for more than 1 hour over there, finally got a car, and then I arrived here. So normally leaving Lome at 10 a.m., I should have got into Accra around 1 p.m. I was here around 6 p.m. This is a little story that happens almost every day when you're traveling either from Togo to Ghana or from Ghana to Togo. I really don't understand the problem. If you discuss with police officer from Ghana, they will say, Togolese started it. You discuss with Togolese people, they will say, Ghanaian started it. So why am I sharing this story? We are here to discuss about protocol on trading in service, which basically means that we might be able to provide services beyond our borders. Financial services, banking, communication, and also transport. How are we going to make this work if even on these minor issues, we are still facing this type of struggle? I also should remind all of us that Togo and Ghana are both members of ECOWAS community. And there are provisions, there are regulations within the ECOWAS community that guarantee already the freedom of movement. So the AfCFTA should normally rely on these economic communities that are already struggling to work in the most efficient way. So that was my little story that I wanted to share with you. Just to say that maybe the real fight won't be having laws. The real fight will be, when are we going to decide to truly implement these laws? Thank you.
I didn't know I had a detractor on my panel, but I'm going to pivot to a more positive, on a more positive note.
I'm not a detractor.
I'm joking, that was a joke. That was a joke. No, but honestly, I think strides have been made to try and make free movement of persons in Africa a little bit more seamless. We see visa-free countries, we see visa on arrival. So I think, the governments are conversant of that fact. Beatrice, I want to talk about mutual recognition. In the Trade and Services Protocol, there's a provision about mutual recognition, which says your certificates, your authorizations, your standards will be mutually recognized in different jurisdictions within Africa. How practically possible is that, given there is still an undertone of discrimination in how Africans see each other?
I think actually this is where benchmarking helps. If you look at the EAC countries, within the EAC, and that goes to what Godwin has just mentioned about how the AfCFTA is supposed to build on the existing regs. Now, under the EAC, you already have certain professional services where there are mutual recognition arrangements existing. What we do is we build on that. Now, the lawyers may be an exception, but definitely all the countries, all the association, the professional associations that are willing, because really this is an initiative or a tool. I actually see it as a tool for implementation of trade agreements that can be driven by the private sector, by the professional associations themselves. This has nothing to do with government. Government just wants you as an association, say, the Bar Association of Nigeria has an agreement with the Bar Association of Kenya. Once that's agreed, that's it. It's just implemented at the border that, oh yes, you're a lawyer, then you come in. And who is it that's the oversight authority? It's the Bar Association, the Bar Council or whatever. So this is where, again, lawyers are at the heart of the agreement. Think about all those contracts that are going to be happening. Think about all the project finance that needs to be done. Think about all the infrastructure that needs to be built. Contracts are at the heart of it. And then you have dispute settlement, because that is the difference between the RECs, the regime set up by the RECs, and I think the EAC is the only exception because they do have the East African Court. But all the others, the court systems aren't that mature. But the dispute settlement system of the AfCFTA is the thing that makes the difference, where you have real enforcement. And again, I actually urge the lawyers to take a really proactive role here, an advocacy role. We in the previous panel, our colleague SAN Shasore mentioned that there is going to be, this dispute settlement system which could be customized in an African way. Very good. Now, how is commercial arbitration going to be developed further under the protocol? Because right now there's just one little line, Article 27, which talks about, you guys, you go off, you have your arbitration, then you come and inform us and tell us about your award. Is that it? No. Where are the procedures? Which seats of arbitration are going to be recognized? All of this can be driven by lawyers. And so again, here is where the challenge is to you. Can you make a project under ACGC? Take the arbitration provisions in the dispute settlement system, do advocacy around it. Can we develop those processes and systems further? Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. The example I use, and the reason why I asked the question was that imagine Nigerian lawyers flooding Ghana seeking to provide legal services. How receptive would the lawyers and Ghanaians be, and how receptive would the Ghanaian government be? And I want you to answer that question, because if you open the floodgates for Nigerians to go across Africa, we will go on.
But you see, this is where I always, some of this, and again, we're back to emotional language, remember? Yeah, it's just all right. We're back to emotional language. Floodgates. No. What I say is, you're looking at a small cake. You're looking at a small pie. But imagine baking a bigger pie. Imagine that your pie is infinite. Then there's no floodgates. There are just not even enough hands on deck to help you do the work. There is so much work to do. When you begin to drill down on this AfCFTA and think about the countless things that need to happen, there is so much work, there aren't enough hands to do it. There aren't enough minds. So that's where I would turn it back to you to say, no, let's build a bigger space. Let's bake that bigger pie so that we all get a slice.
I'd like to...
Sorry, thank you for the applause, but I was just playing devil's advocate. I don't actually believe, what I was asking you, but, some people do believe that. Godwin.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to what Beatrice said about the role as lawyers we have to play in implementing all this. We do have some examples of lawyers coming together with the same regulations. The country I come from is a member of the West African Economic and Monetary Union. In 2014, we adopted a set of common rules applicable to the legal profession. So if you are a lawyer admitted to the Bar of Togo, same rules with Benin, with Mali, or Burkina. But at the same time, once again, I'm going to come back to our emotional reaction, our, mental disposition to all these issues. Normally, this zone should have enhanced the creation, the incorporation of big law firms. I'm still looking for them. We have freedom of movement for lawyers within this area. The text also says that you can go and establish a practice in any other country of the WMU zone. But when you go there, be sure that there will be protective reaction. You'll have to cross so many barriers before implementing your office in the said country. But it's a start because the rules are the same for these 8 countries. I would also like to add about the arbitration process. We have a common dispute settlement process across another zone, which is the OADA zone. 17 member states with the same laws applicable to incorporation of companies, applicable to debt recovery, bankruptcy, and also arbitration. It's already something. But what I've noted, and I believe it's also something we should be mindful of, I noted that the most areas that are working, if not perfectly, that are, let's say that are on the right path, there are areas in which you will see a common civil tradition, a common colonial inheritance, which make it easier for this country to come together. So in my opinion, the AfCFTA should really consider an approach where we will try to create economic zones, regional economic zone, group by group, mapping our laws so that we can have standards of practice which will be useful to everybody who wants to trade in services within the free trade area. Thank you.
Thank you, Godwin. We've spoken about the private sector quite a bit on this session, so I want to dovetail really quickly to the public sector and government and policymakers and lawmakers. Do you think, Beatrice, there needs to be a change in mentality? There is a tendency for our governments to be quite stubborn in terms of pivoting to nuances they don't understand in particular. Me personally, I find some of our laws, and I'm from Nigeria, so I find some of our laws very draconian, very archaic. Some need to be changed in order for this AfCFTA to really fly. Capacity building and sensitization for public officials is going to be very critical. So what are your thoughts on that?
I definitely agree with that. I also agree that there has to be coordination or better coordination at the national level between the trade ministries, who are the ones in the driver's seat in terms of the negotiation and the implementation of the agreement, and the other government institutions. So take, for instance, we're liberalizing transport, we're liberalizing tourism services, financial services, and then, of course, a raft of services under business services. Now, the transport ministry is not the one that comes to the negotiation table, but it's the transport ministry that must implement the regulatory framework on transportation. Similarly with tourism. So that coordination has got to be consistent all throughout, and even taking things like the movement of persons, the immigration officials. I mean, everybody has a story about immigration. We just heard from Godwin now. Those immigration officials have to have a different narrative when it comes to the AfCFTA. Why is this important? What is it for? How does the AfCFTA interact with, for instance, the AU protocol on free movement, which is a very general protocol and takes a rights-based approach, versus our protocol, which is looking very much at a negotiated approach under Mode 4 to the temporary, because remember, That's the wording that comes from the GATS. It's a temporary movement. So you're just there for a little while and then you go back. Whilst the AU Free Movement Protocol says, I can go there, I can stay, I can set up residence, you know? So these are the things that whole narrative of, we're afraid the Nigerians will come and flood us. No, actually, the Nigerians are Africans. So that's the narrative has to change, that as the AfCFTA, we are moving, this is the first step towards the African Economic Community, and that Nigerian, that Ghanaian is an African, and therefore this whole notion of local content perhaps should even shift to just looking at you as, oh, that's a fellow African with a particular skill that I want to come into my territory, into my business, to make me more competitive, make my business more competitive. The second dialogue that has to be consistent is the dialogue between government and private sector. A lot of the time, the governments actually don't even know the shape of trade. Take tourism, for instance. A lot of governments don't know that when that tourist comes into your market, into your country, to either as a business tourist, to attend a conference, and then it decides, oh yes, I want to go down to the Akosombo Dam, or I want to go to the Cape Coast Castle, that you are then exporting tourism services. That's the export of tourism services under the whole notion of trade in tourism services. So these are this narrative that the governments have to be educated about how tourism or how trade takes place is a constant dialogue that has to take place. Even the fact that somebody could sit as an accountant in, Gabon and extend their speciality and their advice to somebody sitting in Angola, and that's export of accountancy services. That notion has got to be constantly wrong in the minds of the civil servants and the policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. That was a great response. Godwin, final question, and then I think we should kick off the Q&A. Okay. And I want you to speak to the in-house counsel here, because you're obviously in-house counsel as well. Yeah, of course. What do you think they need to do to scale up the various organizations in readiness of the AfCFTA really kicking off? Is there anything they need to be doing? Is there any training they need to be doing? And as a prelude, before his response, we at ALP Trade Africa, we have an AfCFTA training arm because we've seen the need for lawyers, business people, finance. They need to be trained on the AfCFTA as well. So, sorry for the soft marketing, but it had to be done. So, Godwin, please, please go on.
No, you did well, because it's definitely comes down to training. And speaking about marketing, I'm an advisory board member of the ACGC. We also provide those type of training. So we are most definitely going to
You are conflicted.
work.
You are conflicted.
No, why am I? I believe that we should, I may have sounded a little bit like a detractor at the start, but no, I'm not. I'm just saying that, I'm just trying to say that we have to really consider what are the blocking points. We should stop being scared of the idea of a continental free trade agreement. Really get into knowing the system, really try to learn about the advantages, because if we can easily provide services across so many countries, I'm seeing the creation of regional and global value chains. If it's easier to transport goods from Ghana to Senegal without having to face at each border tariffs and customs, I believe it will enhance the transportation of goods from one country to another. So we really need, as in-house counsel, to learn about AfCFTA. We should take any opportunity to find some training about it. I don't know if maybe Beatrice is here. I don't know if there's any specific program for in-house counsels. So I believe there should be those type of programs, and I will simply encourage all of us to really take an interest into it. Okay, I wanted to add something about something Beatrice said earlier. This is not exactly the question you asked me. It was about local content. We are currently seeing some sort of contradictory movement on the continent. At the same moment we are talking about free trade agreements, you have some countries that are really improving their local content requirements. I'm thinking about countries, I'm not seeing him anymore, I have a colleague from Guinea. I'm thinking about countries like Guinea, Mali, Nigeria also, if I'm not wrong. And I don't think it necessarily has to be a contradiction between both of them, because I know there are some countries in East Africa, I think it is Tanzania, Uganda, and the third one, that came up with a regional approach of the local content. I believe that we can also have that regional approach within the free trade agreement, so that if the skill I'm looking for is not in Ghana, I will not go directly outside of Africa. I'll first look for him maybe in Togo or Burkina or any other country of the continent before. So this, once again, to say that this is an opportunity for all of us to improve our skills, to enhance economic growth, provided that our mental barriers, we do something about it. Thank you.
Now, a round of applause. That was fantastic. So finally, before we kick off the Q&A, I asked this question 1 year ago about how many people had read the AfCFTA agreement. In that session, 3 people raised their hands. So I'm going to repeat that question and ask how many people have actually read the whole agreement. Show of hands, please. 2. So even less than last year. Oh, we're doing a fantastic job. I don't know if I'm coming back next year, but please, let the show of hands be at least 10 people, because if we're talking about scaling up and you know, actually realizing and growing this AfCFTA, we as lawyers, as legal counsel, we are so pivotal in what's in doing this. So we need to be really keyed in, really keyed in.
Make an audio book. Make the audio book.
Yeah. Audio book. Fantastic. So we'll go into a round of Q&A, questions and answers, and Laston will take it from here. Thank you. And sorry, before, a round of applause for my panelists.
Yes, thank you so much, Solagbade, for that very interesting session. Like Mr. Shasore said, he will be back, so I will invite him to be back. Together with his panelists, I'll invite Ozim and as well as Mansa. You're welcome to join us. The promise that the audience and some people had whispered to me is that many questions are coming to you, Beatrice, but thank God you have the backing of all the other panelists. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm working with the IT team and the media team. We have some microphones that are going round. And we had also requested to have Adetola, yes, and he has been waiting. So we have our fully constituted panel. Can you join me to give them another hand of applause? Okay, so this is where it gets interesting, because we have been listening to you, you have been sharing your thoughts, and also we have some questions, we have some thoughts that a couple of us wanted to throw at you, so that most of what Solagbade was calling detractors, there are many people that are already converted to agree that this is a possible dream. One of the things that Tekyo was asking, do we want to do it, and can we do it? And just from one of the questions that people, 1 or 2 people whispered to me, which I'll read out, as I'm welcoming to see any hands that are going up so that we can have, yes, we already have a hand. Oh, very good. Now, Beatrice, you're in for it. The question's already up there. So we have a hand right at the front. Very good. As those questions come in, there is a question that was whispered to me, since we are having a discussion with General Counsel and in-house counsel, And one of the colleagues here asked, what are the low-hanging fruits? What are those before we talk about the complicated agreements that are under negotiation, the in-house counsel and general counsel here are returning to their respective organization, whether in the public sector or private sector. And the question is, what are the low-hanging fruits that a general counsel or in-house counsel can take advantage of under the AfCFTA? And we are going to pick another 2 sets of questions so that we have a round of answers before we pick the next question. I think already a microphone has been delivered. You'll just tell us your name and then your question, please.
My name is Adetola Olumeyo, and I'd like to thank all of you. I really enjoyed listening to you. I've got 2 questions. First one is language. In Africa, our languages are diverse in each country, and even when we have the regional corporations, we still don't have the same language. We've got English, French, Portuguese. So what are we doing regarding language? How are we resolving that? So because that communication will be the very first thing to think about when we're thinking about a business. How are we communicating? My brother Godwin and I are neighbors almost, yet we speak different languages. So when you're talking business, you do have to think about that. And then money, I'm really interested in that because I've had a situation with that as well. So what conversion rate are we working with when we're thinking about money? Is there going to be a central bank for AU that will then say this will be the conversion rate? Because as we know, for example, I'm Nigerian. We started this year with about 350 to $1, and now we're over 1,000 to $1. So when those movements within even local currencies happen, how do the adjustments get made? So that every time I have to pay someone, I'm paying what the person truly should be paid, and they're not affected by the inflation in my country. So how are we hedging against that? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. The question of the languages, we are a diverse continent. What are we doing regarding the language? And the question of the money, do we envisage a central bank for the African Union? Mr. Shasore wanted someone to make a commitment what's happening to the dollar, and Adetola refused. He was very diplomatic about it. The question has come back again. We had another hand just right. Oh, okay, we have another hand just right at the back before we come to the front.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tolu from Nigeria. Thanks to all the panelists. Very insightful submissions have been made. But I think there's some arguments with regards to the AfCFTA being academic because of the lack of infrastructural framework needed to give it life. Godwin's anecdote is a sore reminder of the realities of the limitations that the AfCFTA has been facing. So my question is to the Secretariat or members of the Secretariat specifically, what engagements or what are we doing to engage the national, the regional, and also the continental bodies to make sure that we have the policy, infrastructural framework needed to give wings to this brilliant policy document?
Thank you so much. And Beatrice, that was really to you, as we had promised. Let's speak. Okay. We had this hand up first, but as also the microphone is moving to we have another microphone this side. We'll pick this hand, and then we'll have the 2. I've seen 2 more hands this side. Please.
Thank you. My name is Jaco Duole. I work in the public sector in Nigeria. And here's my question. If you look at the AfCFTA, it's quite a complex instrument with so many chapters. And I remember Shasore Silk saying that he hasn't read the whole act and doesn't know anybody who has, perhaps Beatrice. Here's where I'm going. It's complex. It's taken us a long time to get to this stage with 55 signatories, 54, waiting for one more, perhaps, as the case may be. Sometimes you look at the end game to interpret how you get there. It's a long journey. My question to the panel, what does an AfCFTA utopia look like to you? What does good look like? Because when you know where we're supposed to be and what it's going to be like when we're there, perhaps then we can work our way back. This is a room full of lawyers, and I also remember Solagbade saying that everybody's got a role to play, and I agree with that. So to help us to understand, what does good look like? What's an AfCFTA, trade utopia? What does it look like to you? Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. And just before we answer those sets of questions, we had two hands that had already gone up much earlier, but what does the end game look like for us? What does the utopia AfCFTA look like? Can we pick these two hands and then we come back to our panel? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Pat. I'm from Kenya. I work with Standard Chartered. So just a follow-on to Adeola's question, the legal systems, because we've inherited a number of different legal systems, our colonial masters. So that, I think, also presents an integration challenge. So I don't know what the panel has to say, but I think there was that alluding to maybe starting from regional sort of integration, making it a bit more robust, but I would be interested to hear what the panel has to say. And then I think the elephant in the room, so I know Shola talked about detractors, but I think the reality on the ground sometimes is that we have very good motives, but the political will, vested interests, exports from wherever or imports and vice versa. So how do we address that big issue of political will? So yes, they've ratified, they've signed off, but where is the political will to yield to a bigger picture? Yeah, thank you.
And we'll pick the last hand. Where is the political will? Is the AfCFTA an academic exercise? I have a question that has also been written, just in case we have more written down questions. I'm working with the team and they can pick them from me. Please, your question.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jacko Ferris from South Africa. So my question revolves around the AfCFTA. Fundamental basis and purpose of the AfCFTA is around industrialization ultimately, not just trade of common goods. So we want to create a society where we actually have an industrial base for Africa, where we have goods and services manufactured on the continent and traded amongst the different countries in different regional hubs. Now, one of the fundamentals of that is of the investment. You need investment in roads, in ports, and all of those other infrastructure that is required for trade-related services and goods. Now, I think one of the panel members spoke about the investment protocol and also specifically arbitration. But the problem, and this is a discussion that was had last week in Windhoek by a number of state parties around the annex to the protocol on investment, talking about dispute settlement. So dispute settlement is fundamental from a continental perspective, specifically for investors. If we talk about African investors that needs to invest, so a Ghanaian investor investing in a DRC, and there's a dispute in the DRC, but there's no effective dispute settlement. And it seems, in my own country, South Africa, is anti-arbitration for one or other reason, but they're also one of the biggest investors. One of the issues I have, and maybe this is the specific question, is stakeholder engagement. There is, and this is what happened last week. So governments, through their trade ministries, make certain concessions in terms of policy, whether arbitration or mediation or whatever the dispute settlement process will be, but there's no consultation with the actual investors or the African businesses that will need to make those investment decisions and have proper protection for their investment. And part of the dispute settlement is one of those guarantees. Thank you.
Dispute resolution settlement for investors under the AfCFTA. Ladies and gentlemen, if you will allow me to take that first set of questions, given our time is well spent with reading the last question that came in. And this is from one of our colleagues from Nigeria, and they're asking, seeing as a full implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area will cause major disruptions across board, including social and cultural disruptions, Beatrice, you're in for this. How do you think our individual cultural values nationally will impact the success or otherwise of the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area frameworks? And then the last question is, are there reasons given why the 7 AU countries have not yet ratified the treaty, whereas they have signed the treaty? And we'll begin probably with that last one, Beatrice. Has the Secretariat received any reasons why the 7 of the countries that signed have not ratified?
Thank you very much, and it seems like there's a range of questions, so thank you very much for that level of engagement. Every country that engages in the AfCFTA is a sovereign country, and they are the ones that decide which agreements they sign and then go on to ratify, or that they sign and wait maybe until they have enough consultation at the national level, enough consensus to move ahead. Different countries have different priorities. So all we do as a Secretariat is just continue to make the case for why this is important. It's important to understand that empirically, the evidence is clear that there is not a single African country that does not benefit from the AfCFTA. Those numbers have been crunched. The evidence is in from both the World Bank, the IMF. In the case of Nigeria, the officials that were responsible went from state to state, and at every level, it was understood Nigeria will benefit, will have a net benefit for entering and implementing the AfCFTA. So it's up to the countries.
Okay. Yeah. And I want to bring you in here, Mr. Shasore, to answer these 2 questions as you add to that. There's
can I add to this first?
And you'll couple it with the issue of languages and how are we dealing with that and how is it likely to disrupt or impact the implementation. You've given us a good history and would want you to help us understand this issue of languages as well.
Okay. I think maybe I just might be able to manage it. And it's part of the earlier part of the question that was asked so eloquently about disruption and how this whole agreement is going to disrupt us sociologically, economically, and one other way. And I say that my simple answer to you is that yes, the AfCFTA is disruptive, but it is a positive disruption. Now, because it's a disruption of a normal that is not normal. If you think back, and some people who know me as a bit of a historian. If you think back at the Berlin Act of 1885, otherwise known as the Scramble for Africa, you will realize that the AfCFTA existed before 1885. The integration and the borderlessness that exists today did not exist before. And the trade and the movement of goods was much freer and much more liberalized than the artificial borders that were created by colonial authorities. So see yourselves, if nothing else, as assisting to dismantle a negative disruption in what is our natural state of existence. And you will find that the languages don't really matter that much because they didn't back then. And there are working languages in all AU documents. The working language, I think there are 4 working languages. So I think that 6 now. Yeah, they deal with issues like that. And unfortunately, they are European languages, so, but they're languages that we can all understand anyway. We can fix that. But the truth is, if you see AfCFTA as a document that is not organic, that is not part of your life, well, I'm sorry. It has happened already. It's not going to happen. It isn't one theoretical thing that might happen. It is already happening around you in varying degrees. What does utopia of it look like? It's always going to be a work in progress. The common market in Europe started in 1950, all right? And it morphed into various different things, from a market to a political union to a court system. And that's how you get closer and closer to integration. And I think the powerhouse that Africa really is deserves Africans believing in the AfCFTA as something that is not just a piece of paper but it's a revolutionary and a disruptive thing, positive disruption for the betterment of everything. Think about the Berlin Act of 1885 that we had nothing to do with.
Thank you, Mr. Shasore. I just want to bring in Adetola, and as you're coming in on that point of positive disruption, do we expect to have a central bank for the African Union? How are we going to handle the issue of the money and facilitating transactions? Adetola.
Yeah, before I get to that, I just want to put a little more color on the issue of the ratification. So I think it's important to have some context about how the process works. And I say this as someone who has served as assistant chief negotiator for Nigeria in my previous life, right? What happens fundamentally is that after you have actually signed an agreement, right? In most countries, particularly countries that have a dualist legal system, you need to still take it to parliament to get it ratified. And the thing is that now that goes beyond the negotiators, right? It goes to the president, goes to the lawmakers, and actually goes through a lot of process, right, in that sense. So there's a point of convincing your head of state or your foreign affairs minister to sign on to the agreement, but it's a process, and most of these countries you talked about are in that process in one form or the other. In some cases, it's that they are still engaging parts of the sectors in their country. In some cases, their process actually takes. For instance, in Nigeria's case, we had to not only engage across the country, we had to do stakeholder engagements around the country, but beyond that was we had to actually gazette the instrument and get the foreign affairs and the Ministry of Justice to do all that kind of work. So it takes a bit of time, procedurally based on the different regulations of different countries, and it actually takes some cost also to get that done. I just want to give that context to how all that plays out. The second thing I wanted to call out more specifically on the issue of central banks, I think there are two big questions, right? The question she asks is about fundamental, how do you deal with currency volatility? I don't think it's actually a very fundamentally difficult question. Today, there's actually a lot of dynamic currency systems that exist for balancing. In fact, today already, you can almost see the exchange rate between Naira and Rand, Naira and dollar, Naira and Kenyan shilling, right? It exists already. And the reason is simple. It's fundamentally a case of demand, supply, and an underlying dynamics of like economics that makes that price. And that already happens today. The real question is not whether you can figure out the real exchange rates. The real issue is more of an issue of what are the rails that exist for that money to move from one place to another. So I'll give you an example. Usually, I can easily tell you, an exchange rate companies exist today that I'll tell you, if I had 1,000 Naira, what is it in Rand? That's not really the difficulty. The difficulty is more a question of saying, okay, I want to now get that money to a bank account in South Africa. What is the rails that I use, right? Oh, now you then get a case where the Nigerian bank will tell you things like, oh, actually, we only can sell dollars to South Africa. We don't know how to send Naira to South Africa. Or, oh, you have to change your money to Rand to South Africa. And that's where it gets difficult. But I don't think the difficulty is in figuring out the exchange. The central banks have done a great job today of figuring out that level of exchange and figuring out the real value of currency. Now, the more fundamental question of are we going to have a central bank? I think that fundamentally it's a question of states' interest. Today, there's very low interest in that subject. And I'll tell you why. The reason is that it takes away a lot of economic sovereignty for a lot of states. And there are also a lot of layers. To get to a central, and you can see already some of the tensions that happens in Europe. To get to a point of having a central bank, you need to first have a centralized monetary policy and a centralized economic policy. The problem is that as long as you don't have an African-wide monetary policy, it's almost impossible to actually have a central bank. Because the question is, what is the central bank going to think of it? Nigeria has inflation that is caused by cost push, right? Ghana has inflation that is caused by supply, right? Supply pool, right? So everyone has all these different issues. Today, the reasons why the central banks can react is because I only have to deal with a demographic that has a similar nature of problems. When you start to have a central bank that has to deal with the entire continent, you have to deal with a different level of complication, a different level of abstraction. Also, today, there's a lot of power that central banks have with printing money, quantitative easing, things that they can do today that they can't do as much when you have a central bank for the entire continent. So a way of just studying the history of what's happened with the economic central bank and the European central bank will show you some of the strains that exist there. I don't think there's interest. I've spoken to a bunch of central bank governors in previous times, particularly even on the protocols particularly. There's not as much interest today. Maybe in some years to come, and the other thing to say is that I think what needs to happen first is we need to first figure out payment movement, which is the easiest part. The more trade happens, then there's an incentive for central bank to say, okay, maybe the best point of action is to say, let's have a centralized monetary policy and then a central bank. But I don't think it's the biggest pertinent issue on the continent today.
Wow, thank you so much, Adetola. And I want to bring you in here, Solagbade, because one of the participants asked, are we in an academic exercise? I know that under the ALP trade, you've been running town halls of, engaging public and private sector. And so, Solagbade, the question is, as it was asked earlier, is the AfCFTA an academic exercise? What is being done to engage, nationally, regionally, or the respective stakeholders on the policy issues? Can you weigh in on that?
That's a tough question, but what I will say is there were always going to be teething issues. If you look at the European Union, how long did that take to materialize? We're in this, 5 years in, 2019 till now. So to be able to see tangible results, it's going to take time, right? So for me, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And someone mentioned political will. I think if the governments apply some introspect, they will see what sort of benefits they can derive in the future, through Africa. Someone mentioned about, infrastructural deficits. We're all aware of that, but there are efforts being made to plug those infrastructural deficits. For example, if you look at the Trans-African Highway Network, there is a concerted effort to make sure that, trade in goods and trade in services do happen and do materialize. Finally, we all forget that this is a part of a wider discussion. The African Union 2063 agenda had the AfCFTA as one of its points, right? And part of those infrastructural developments are also there. So I think it's a question of being patient. I think it's a question of seeing what we can do on a granular scale at our level to be able to impact not only grassroots level, but also governmental level to see how we can take it and scale it to a higher level.
And just to
Yes.
chip in, a lot is even happening without, a lot is happening in the private sector without the herald and celebration and the buntings. I've been looking into the impact of the AfCFTA and maritime trade, which is an area that I'm fairly confident that not many people have looked into. And that port-to-port transport of goods in Africa, African port to African port, is a fraction of what it could be when you look at intra-Europe port-to-port trade. I mean, the top performing ports in Africa are Mombasa and Tangiers, and they're doing 2.3 to 3.2 TEUs. That is the measurement of a 20-foot container. And the intra-European trade is $3.2 trillion, okay? Now, it shows you the gap. But that 3.2 and the 2.2 of Mombasa and Tangiers was 10 years ago, it was in the hundreds. It wasn't even up to the millions. So the growth is there, and you will find that these trade routes will now continue to show up more. The more you've done 2 GTIs. Those 2 GTIs went by ship and by plane, all right? Now, something had to leave Lagos to Kenya. You understand? That has been carrying maybe some cargo and a lot of passengers. But suddenly, you'll see a lot more cargo flights going in between those 2 countries. And that is the direct result. And nobody flags that off. There's no ceremony for that to happen. It'll happen before you know it. Sorry.
And I want to bring in Mansa and Tekyo there, right there. The issue of, political will, old laws. Is it possible, in light of what Mr. Shasore has just shared and Solagbade, to have a bit of a blended private sector led, in light of we have old laws, old colonial laws, then lack of a political will, but as traders, as General Counsel advising entities that want to benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Area, what can be done about this issue of the old laws and lack of political will? I'll bring in Mansa here and Tekyo.
Yes. Apart from, I think Mr. Shasore is trying to talk about policy over here, but I believe, yes, we do need the political will. And I think that the older generation are a bit stuck in their ways and a bit more nationalistic and protectionist than perhaps I believe that we can fuse certain things into our curricula to ensure that this does not exist with the generation that is coming. So,
thank you very much.
Things like antitrust law, competition law, we can incorporate that into our curricula at the university level. And I believe that we said AfCFTA is here to stay, so that as things progress, I believe that it gets easier. The younger ones are more open. Well, that's what I believe. And I also wanted to touch on the issue of the language barriers. In as much as it may present a challenge, I also think that it presents opportunities, because you can now trade your service across, and we have translators moving across borders to offer services. We also have AI tools that can do translations. And with the working languages that we have adopted, 6 of them, we can also incorporate that into the curricula to ensure, have these things in mind when we are formulating curricula for the kids, so that they can learn these languages and it will be less of a problem in the future.
Tekyo? Yeah, thank you. About the political will, I believe it comes down to demonstrating the interests of the free trade agreement to our governments, to everybody in a position where they have to decide. And talking about the interest of the free trade agreement, I was looking for a note. It said on the website that the AfCFTA is expected to expand the size of Africa's economy to $29 trillion by 2015. I believe there's a lot of research that is backing up this estimation. Yeah. So basically, we have to demonstrate to our leaders, to our governors, that there is really an interest for all of us to be in this free trade agreement. It will help us grow all together. It will, there's economic growth for all of us in it. Your question about the old laws, for me, it also goes back to the situation of knowing our laws. Because, you know, I'm sure I'm not the only one who discovered one old law, maybe because he was doing some due diligence on something, and he discovered that there's maybe a law adopted in 1947 that is still applicable to the issue. So we have to know our laws. We have to promote a better access to our regulations. Of course, AI tools will be useful there. So in general, we have to know what the law says. And again, mapping all of these regulations will be helpful. If I take a country like Ghana, for example, what are the main features of the law in all of the sectors that are also taken into account by the free trade agreement? How are they going hand in hand? What Ghana should change to be aligned with what the free trade agreement is saying? And that exercise has to be done for all of our country. It's a lot of work, of course, and I believe that's where us lawyers, in-house counsel, have definitely a lot of work to do to contribute to the success of the free trade agreement. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I just want to bring in Ozim here, because we had a question on industrialization of Africa being one of the intended benefits of the AfCFTA, and investment disputes definitely become an issue at the center of every time you have investments being made. And as an Executive General Counsel of Sub-Saharan Africa, you're right, I believe, to speak to when investments disputes are envisaged. What should we expect, or what should we be thinking about under AfCFTA, in light of what Beatrice said, the one line, go, arbitrate, then come inform us of the result?
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm also aware that the details of the dispute resolution mechanism are still in the works. However, I want us to start with Africa, who we are. Regardless, and someone asked a question earlier about the different legal system, languages, etc. One thing I've realized in the course of working across Africa is that regardless of the language, regardless of the legal system, And regardless of the type of dispute, we value relationship.
Yeah.
The humanity in us trumps all this. And I like the example, and of course, I love my safari, and I love the example of asking the blind people blindfolding children and asking them to describe the elephant. And you're touching the different parts of the elephant.
Yeah.
And everyone was right. But everyone thought the other person was wrong because of the part of the elephant they were touching. Investment is what we want. Doing business in the region is what we want, and it will keep thriving. However, what I would want to leave us with as in-house counsel and as external solicitors supporting us, especially with dispute, personally, the last thing I want is to be at dispute with my customer, because we are not in the business to prove who is right or who is wrong. We're in the business to sell today and sell again tomorrow. I don't want to waste time in court proving a right that will knock me out of business tomorrow. So our dispute resolution mechanisms, yes, will have nice concepts, whether it's mediation, arbitration, litigation. Yes, those are nice to have legal concept. But at the end of the day, what may be at issue may just be the fact that you walked into a room and you didn't greet the person. So you need to understand those nuances, and those things have become very important to me because of the culture shock I've had to experience walking across Africa. I'm Nigerian. You all know, when they say, oh, you are Nigerian, you don't even know whether they mean it in a positive or in a negative way, depending on how you come across. Right? And I remember my first So my first culture shock when I moved to Kenya was, I don't know whether it happens to you, but walk into an office in Nigeria, say hello, you start greeting from the door to your desk. You don't necessarily need to wait for a response. That's the way we are. So I moved to Kenya, first day at work, I start from the reception, and I didn't even notice they were not answering. So I was just saying hello to everybody, but I noticed that somebody just looked at me and, with some sort of expression on her face that I couldn't quite understand what it was. But it took me time to realize that I was actually greeting and answering myself, But someone had the courage to ask me, why is it that you're always talking to everybody as you are going to your desk? And I realized that people were a bit more private, So I had to tone down a bit, right? And love people the way they want to be loved. And that's the same way you bring into dispute. Again, you're not negotiating or at war with inanimate objects. You're at war or at dispute with human beings. So bring that into your dispute resolution, mechanism. And as an in-house counsel, I'm definitely not signing any contract that takes me straight to court without having an opportunity to discuss amicably. It's a deal breaker for me. Because what's the point? So I need to have an opportunity to sit down and say, okay, what is really the issue? And if you don't know what the issue is, find out from your colleagues, right? Because the way you may perceive a disrespect is not the same way. Now, talking about disrespect, I remember, you say you've seen all sorts of laws, and African laws can be a bit. So we had a situation, a labor dispute in Equatorial Guinea, and they have a law. I don't know how else to explain it in English, but the onus is on you to prove that you haven't made the other person disparate. So somebody could sue you for making them feel less of themselves. Okay. Again, that was my first expression, and I'm like, how do I establish that I haven't made you feel less? Is it not the onus on you to how I made you? But again, some of these things are foisted on us as Africans. So it's time for us, now that we have the African Free Trade Zone Agreement, also look at where do we find our Africanness within this treaty? And how do we also elevate it to make businesses thrive? Because, and it also may come down to also to the point Auntie made about even introducing the antitrust courses in university. It may even come as far as the conversations you have at dinner table. Maybe somebody does something, say, why are you behaving like these people? And that's how you sow the seed that, okay, this particular country, this particular people, they are like this. And the child grows up, meets them in university, and something happens. Oh, no wonder, that was what my mommy said years back at dinner table. That's the way you people are. We have to be deliberate about the subtle biases, messages we pass across, because those are feed our position. You find yourself holding to a position that you can't even justify.
Exactly.
Because your mind, you have a mental block about this, the way they are. See the uniqueness, see the Ubuntu, see the oneness in Africa, and also see the fact that, listen, if it means eating together, drinking together, and that may be easier to settle disputes and maybe less hourly rates for Mr. Shasore. But again, we have to get there. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Let us give our panel a hand of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand between you and the networking lunch, so we'll just take 30 seconds. We still have questions coming in, but unfortunately our time is well spent. But as each of the panelists takes just 30 seconds to give their parting shot, I will ask Beatrice to answer this question in her final remarks when she comes up. Please let us know if the barter system will be a major part of the trade going forward. Someone is asking, please let us know if the barter system will be a major part of the trade going forward. So we'll take Adetola, 30 seconds, your parting shots before we come to the panelists here. Adetola, over to you, 30 seconds.
I think fundamentally it's three things, right? One is that in the end, the AfCFTA and all the agreements are laws, right? They only work if private sector individuals like yourself actually try to use them, meaning go try to trade, try to expand into a new market, try to buy in a new market, try to find a partner in a new market and build a product out for it. Two is that the future of the continent fundamentally will rely on people taking all these ideas of Pan-African expansion and actually building products on the back of it, doing transactions on the back of it, ensuring that it actually becomes a reality. And the last thing I would say fundamentally is the world is going to look different over the next few years, right? It's taken 70 years for the European Union to get to where exactly it is now. But the world's going to look very different over the next few years with AI, with technology and all that. And I think that fundamentally, some of the things we think are challenges today would look easy in the next few years. The question is, the future is created by those that actually design and actively participate in it. And the question I'm curious about is, what role are we all playing in designing the exact future we want for Africa? Thank you so much for having me on the panel.
Thank you, Adetola. Mansa, your parting shots, 30 seconds.
Well, I believe that we have a well thought out, meaningful framework with which we can realize this common market. I think we need to be intentional and deliberate about it, and also be patient and give it time. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you, Mansa. Ozim, your 30 seconds, your parting shots.
It is possible. Let's keep at it.
Okay, it is possible. Thank you so much. Tekyo, your parting shots.
I'll try to be really quick. There was a last part in my anecdote that I saved for my closing remark. When I was waiting there, at a moment I got hungry. Mm-hmm. So I crossed the street to buy some food, and the lady and I, we were speaking in Ewe. We are speaking exactly the same language Togo shares with Ghana, with Benin, and last I heard there's also a part of Nigeria where people speak Ewe. This to say that we do have things in common, similarities, on which we should build on. And to answer what Dapo said, based on these similarities from group by group of countries, what we expect is the free trade agreement to lead in a utopia, like you said, in which we all feel like we are home. Thank you.
Thank you. Solagbade, your 30 seconds.
I think the agreement will stem the over-reliance on the West. Africa does need some form of an industrial revolution. The manufacturing industries need to be revamped, and it's coming. It's just a case of when.
And I'll invite Beatrice.
My final thought is actually that Africa made this decision that it wants this regional integration agenda.
Yeah.
So the idea of the political will, it's already done and dusted. Now, everybody must put shoulders to the wheel to ensure that it happens. And this is a long game we're playing here. We talk about progressive liberalization under the protocol, meaning that it's not tomorrow that it will happen. This is a 5, 10, 20, 40, 50, 60-year process. Agenda 2063, imagine what that will look like. Dapo talked about the utopia. For me, utopia, I want to be able to, I come from Sierra Leone, I want to be able to hop on a train that takes me from Freetown to Dar es Salaam. Just a train journey, overnight. Thank you.
Mr. Shasore, your 30 seconds.
I'll be on that train. But seriously, you know, we are dismantling in a non-coercive way what took 100 years to install through coercion, blood, sweat, and tears. It seems as if it's a longer game, and it is, like Beatrice has said. But it is no less profound than the effects the 100 years of blood, sweat, and tears had on us. And this integration is a reversal to what Africa used to be. And if we see that as the guiding philosophy, the organic feeling, this agreement has already come alive. It'll be a success.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for shooting a couple minutes over our time, but can you join me to give our panelists a final round of applause?